Good day, this is Bastiaan Jansen and welcome everybody. And today we're going to talk about data center operations, the future of data center operations. And as we all know, a fantastic data center, a well-oiled data center delivery machine, so we speak, is not only a fantastic building. It is also how do we operate the data center. And in the operations of data centers, humans are involved. We talk about the human factor, and the human factor is involved in many downtime events. And today we're going to talk about the operations, the future of operations, processes, checklists, etc. But we think we have a solution to minimize human error regarding downtime in data centers. At the end, we have a Q&A. So please drop your questions in the Q&A box, as I said. And I now want to announce Edward van Leent, the speaker of today. Edward, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bastiaan, and welcome everybody to this webinar, where we hope to give you a bit of a glimpse on, a quality management framework for data centers. So without further ado, let me talk a little bit about the agenda. We're going to touch quickly on EPI, who we are, just for those of you who are, might not be familiar with us yet. We'll talk about some of the reasons why data centers experience downtime and for what kind of level that actually happens. Talk about the operations framework, the DCOS, which is the Data Center Operations Standard, where we go into a little bit more detail, a bit about audit certification, and of course a summary and the Q&A. So just to talk about EPI, we're originally from the UK, started 36 years ago, and we moved the headquarters into Singapore around 2000 in 1999. We're operating primarily through a partner network, and they are supported by the offices that we have in the various continents, covering basically every continent and time zone. Within EPI, we're very focused on data centers, and we basically touching on three areas. We do design validation. That's for those people that are embarking on the new data center project, or people that are going through a renovation or enhancement of their existing data center. We do auditing and certification for facilities, so the data center building that is up and running, and the data center and IT training. As I said, quoted in various magazines, won various awards, and recently we had the Gold Leadership Award for TA942, which a lot of organizations probably are familiar with as well. So let's go into the subject of today. Let's start with the important matter of today, data center downtime. We all know that data centers are extremely complex. There are many, many things that we are, need to cover. Whether it is the electrical system, mechanical systems, network, and all the other items around a data center facility. Now, it is not all about the data center facility. Yeah, within EPI, we always say there are three things that you as a data center operator owner need to do right. That means you have the right product. That means the data center itself. You need to have the processes in place, and you need to have the right people in place. Because ultimately, when people are putting the IT systems and applications in our data center, it's all about them trusting us that we take care of them, that their data is well protected, and that it's available whenever they require it. So for the purpose of today, we're going to focus on the process side. Now, familiar in the data center is that everybody knows that human error is one of the big contributors to downtime. Sometimes that could be due to various events related to people doing the wrong things at the wrong time, or processes that are not well aligned, etc. Overall, a big impact. And depending on which research you are looking at, some quote as little as 20 or 24% of downtime caused by human errors, and some go all the way up to 80 or sometimes even 85% of downtime created by human error. So it is clear, and which research you believe doesn't really matter, but it is very clear that humans are a big contributing factor to the availability of the data center. And we all know that data center downtime is, undesirable. We really don't want that, because it could lead to various impacts in terms of business revenue, right? Lost sales, the productivity that might be not up to the right level, data that might get lost. And if you're a commercial data center operator owner, it might even lead to liability in terms of that you have to, pay penalties to your customers, etc. And overall, I think everybody don't want to be in the newspaper when the data center went down, because that will have a big hit on the brand that you are representing and its reputation. So we really need to be careful. And what is to be careful about? Well, obviously we need to look and say what are the factors that are, causing this downtime. Now, the big issues are listed here: staff not following the procedures and management not being aware of this. This is actually, maybe surprising to you, but as we go to various data centers, sometimes we talk to the senior management and they say that everything is fantastic, nothing is wrong, everything is well documented. And then we talk to people on the operational floor and they just not following the process or not to the level that was actually desired or what management are believing is happening. We also see that our processes are not well described. They are, not at the right maturity level in relation that, the business requires. Integration is a very big issue in most of the data centers. Sometimes we find out that security doesn't like the IT people don't like the data center people, and nobody seems to like the salespeople. So we need to make sure that actually in a real proper organization that all these layers are interacting appropriately with each other in order to avoid the issues there. And of course, we have the good old human errors related to the oopsies, pushing the wrong buttons at the wrong time, so to speak, which could happen in any organization. Now, I have some good news for you as well, because human error is predictable. Can you imagine if you take a piece of paper and you write down all the possible problems within your data center from a process point of view? I'm sure that you can come down to quite a lengthy list of all the potential issues that might happen. Now, if you have that list, of course, you could work through that list and say, okay, which of those potential risk factors can be mitigated by either, having better processes in place and procedures, maybe train people better. And the whole aim is, of course, by doing so, is to prevent problems from happening in the first place. That is the ultimate goal. Now, we know that we can never prevent all the factors that might cause the downtime. So another thing that we need to look at is, of course, to ask ourselves a question that if an event happens, how can we minimize the impact on the organization? So those are the two things that we, from a management point of view, always like to do. Either prevent, or if we can't prevent it, or it is too costly in a certain way, to work on cost minimization and risk minimization. Now, for some of you who know me, I always like the airline industry a lot. And I think this is a great example where you can see how the airline has, proper control over processes. So here you see a chart that shows the data from IATA, which is the governing body for airlines. And here they show the traffic, in terms of number of flights and passengers carried in the year 2009, 14, and 2022. The other years, 2021 and 2020, are not representative because that obviously was during the good old COVID times. So as you can see, despite having, an increase in flights and all that stuff and passengers carried, the number of accidents and fatal accidents has dropped tremendously. Now, part of that is, of course, due to technology improvements. And I think we have seen the same in data centers as well, where UPS technologies and air conditioning systems and generators, etc., over time have improved in terms of quality and reliability of the equipment. But one of the other very, very big factors why the airline industry is so, reliable, is the, checklist and the processes that they have in place. No matter how many times a pilot has flown the same route, using the same aircraft, etc., they still have to diligently go through this checklist, and tick off the boxes as a pre-flight, after-flight check, etc., etc. And this is something that they wouldn't compromise on. So even if they're late for the departure, they're not going to throw the checklist aside and say, forget about it, we'll take off anyway. That doesn't happen. Now ask yourself the question, how many times have you had, skipped a few or maybe a whole process in your organization purely because you got the pressure that systems had to be quickly, brought up and live in the environment, and then suddenly the process that we normally walk through in terms of staging and application commissioning went out of the window and we're just rushing through it. So this is one of the reasons, of course, why in the data center environment we see much more issues than, for example, in the airline industry. So what we ultimately would like to do to minimize the risk of downtime and to increase efficiency and effectiveness of the operation is to put some framework in place. Now, many years ago, within EPI, we've developed an IT and data center framework, and you see that here on this particular slide. In the middle bottom, you see the data center infrastructure. This is the good old building with all the IT equipment inside. And as you can see, it's actually a very small portion of the overall framework. There are many other layers that we as a data center operator owner, whether that is a commercial data center or an enterprise data center, all those things that we need to take care of. And as you can see, a lot of them are process-based. So the facility is in that sense a small portion of the overall framework. And if you look at the processes, it's quite complicated because it's not just about the individual process, whether that is done very well and is at a good maturity level. It is also the interaction that it has with other processes and how they can influence the outcome of another process. So not going through this chart in detail, but as you can see, there are many things that are interacting with each other and therefore could have an influence on the quality of service that we are delivering to our end users. So this is a bit of the challenge that data center operators have today. Yeah, if you go to data center operator owners and say, how about your quality management framework for operations? The questions that we always get is like, well, can you please give me a list of all the processes that we need to have in place, right? Then the next question is always, if you have those processes in place, to what level of detail do we need to describe them? And that is actually, quite a good question, because if you over-engineer processes, i.e. you make them too detailed, too many checklists, etc., then I can guarantee you that people start skipping it because they just think there is too much paperwork to be done. If you make them too skinny, you might not have the right control mechanisms in place to prevent risky scenarios. And of course, the question is always, what about automation? Now, automation is of course great. It will help you to eliminate maybe some of the manual processes and keep better track of certain items. But in order to run a data center, automation can help, but it's not, the thing that is going to solve all your problems. So is it desirable? Absolutely. Is it a must? Not really. You can do it also in many other ways, which of course depends on the complexity of your data center operations as well. Another issue that we see in the data center is this integration part. As I mentioned it before, the facilities, IT and business management are not always in sync with each other. We find scenarios where the IT or data center manager is actually not even having a stake at the table when there are talks about where the business is going and what needs to be done in order to bring the business to a higher level. And suddenly when a business plan is made up, it basically gets thrown over the fence to the IT and data center people and say, good luck, let me know when it's running. That is obviously a major problem in a lot of organizations, both from a commercial data center point of view, but also in an enterprise data center setup. Another big question that we always get, say, what are the best practices, or what guideline or standard can I use to make sure that I get to this level of operational excellence? That is a major question. So what most data centers have done is that they've taken the ISO standards as a baseline for quality management. I'm sure you're familiar with good old ISO 9000. Some data centers have implemented 20,000, 27,000, etc. The bad news about those ISO standards is that they are not specifically written for the data center environment. They're very generic quality management systems typically, and therefore it's kind of like having a square peg trying to push through a round hole. It just doesn't always work very well. And because they are so generic, you often see various levels and degrees of implementation within data centers. So a data center that is certified, for example, for 27,001 or 20,000, could still have a major difference from data center A to data center B, which for end users could be quite a concern and a risk, of course. Another problem I have with the ISO standards is that they are very generic, as I said before. So that leads to a lot of complications. Most of the time, because it is so generic, we see that the data center operator owners tend to hire consultants to help them to implement a particular ISO standard. And that is fantastic. But why do we actually need those consultants? Well, very often because this standard is so generic that sometimes we just don't know what is right, what is wrong. To what level do we need to implement it? For example, in one of the standards, they talk about that you should have, say, perimeter security. Now, what is perimeter security? Define that for me. Is that a big wall of 2 meters high, or is it 3 meters high? Is it a bunch of security guards with guns on every corner? Is it just, simple cameras, etc., etc.? So because of these varying degrees of interpretation of the standard, there is often a tension between the customer and the consultant and the auditor, who ultimately have to determine whether a organization has abided through all the regulations or all the criteria stated in the particular standard. The other big problem with ISO is that it's a pass-fail type of standard. So you have no, say, and you have no, eligibility to say this is more critical than something else. You cannot say that security is more important to you than, for example, say service level management or the other way around. So it makes it, very difficult to adapt it to different type of data center environments. It doesn't allow you to slowly grow on this excellence level. It's kind of like you implement everything or you don't, and if you do only 90%, you basically will not pass. So it's very difficult also from a business management point of view to start deciding on, what is important to us, what is it that we should fix first, compared to other matters, because with ISO you have to kind of like fix everything in one go. And that is where we see that a lot of people get stressed out when they start implementing ISO standards, where there is suddenly such a burst of things coming over you that you need to fix all at once, so to speak, in order to pass a certification, if that is what you're aiming for. The other problem is in data centers that we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And that is a problem, right? Because as Einstein always said, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you get the same results, and those results might not always be desirable. So why are we so resistant to change? Well, sometimes it's because we don't know that there's something else that might be better. Sometimes it's just we're so busy with the daily activities that we simply don't take a step back and say, okay, let's see whether we can make improvements that can make our job easier, and less risky. And this is the other thing, of course, that we hear nowadays. People think that AI, the artificial intelligence, is going to solve all their problems. Well, I can guarantee you it is not. Can it assist? Absolutely. AI is getting better and better. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations that provide so-called AI solutions are not really providing AI. A lot of it is basically rule-based decision-making, which is stuff that we already did 20 years ago. So be careful when people start shouting that they have an AI solution. But forget about AI. It will definitely help, and it will creep into data centers more and more. But bad luck for you. AI can't fix your air conditioner. AI can't go under the floor and pull a few cables, or install a server, right? All those things will come eventually, but at the moment you still need to do things differently, and obviously with processes and people. So all in all, data centers are still at great risk. And this is quite funny because when we talk to some of the data centers, say, hey, tell me about your data center in terms of reliability and risks and all the stuff. And the funny part is that they always say, oh, everything is fantastic. We have never had any downtime, etc. And as you have seen from the various research, that is not really true, because anonymous research has shown that a lot of data centers, do have downtime to a varying degree. So what we would like to do today is to introduce you to the DCOS, Data Center Operation Standard, which is a quality management system framework specifically written for data centers. So what does DCOS do? Well, at a high level, it achieves a couple of things. First of all, it makes sure that the data center operations is aligned with the business requirements. It also will make sure that if you start implementing it, you don't have to worry about what type of data center you have, whether you're an enterprise, whether you're commercial, whether you're hybrid, whether you're very critical or not so critical, whether you're very small or very big. It is adaptable to any type and size. The other part that DCOS achieves is that it helps you to progressively achieve this level of operational excellence. We all understand that data centers very often are stressed to the limit. We don't have a lot of time. We don't have always all the resources that we would like to have. So with DCOS, it allows you to slowly implement and in those areas that you believe are the most valuable for your business. Ultimate goal is, of course, to help you to reduce the risk. And at the same time, we need to ensure that we are always compliant to regulatory, but also business compliance. Business compliance might be kind of regulations that pertain to a particular industry, for example, the banking industry or the airline industry, etc. So basically what happened is that the DCOS was written and developed following the NC and ISO procedures in terms of standards development, and it has been reviewed by many organizations. So this is not something that we developed ourselves alone. There were more than, I think it was about 70 plus companies that were involved from around the world, from various industries, big and small, commercial, enterprise, in order to establish this quality framework. So how is it developed? Well, this is, as for some of you might be a familiar picture. When you develop a project based on NC and ISO procedures, you normally create a draft. Then it goes into what they call a technical committee, which is a committee with subject matter experts, which are confined in a committee that is coming together every regular time, whether it's weekly or monthly. Once they come to a draft that they say is of adequate quality, then it goes into what we call an industry ballot process. So this is where it goes out in industry for feedback. And of course, there might still be results coming back from that where the standard needs to be refined. And then it goes to the final default balancing, as we call it, and then it went out. And the latest version of DCOS was released in the year 2021. So what is in the DCOS? Well, DCOS is a quality management framework that addresses all the 11 disciplines that are required to run an effective and efficient data center. Not going to mention all of them here because they're listed clearly here on the chart. But as you can see, they are touching on every part of the data center from an operations, governance, and maintenance perspective. Now, what happens is that, or what is described in the DCOS, is that we have these main disciplines, but within each of the discipline, there are also sub-disciplines. So for example, let's take service level management, which is one of the first one, obviously, that you need to look at because you need to know what kind of service you need to deliver to your end user, whether that end user is external or internal. So if you look at, say, the DCOS and you look at, say, the chapter of service level management, you will see it broken down in the number of sub-disciplines that are important to deliver a proper service level management program. And as you can see, and again, I'm not going through all the bullet items, but it of course starts with the needs analysis, because you need to understand what service your customer is requiring. And then you start breaking it down to the requirements, and of course having underpinning agreements, etc., etc. So for each of those 11 disciplines, you will find a whole list of sub-disciplines that you by right should look at to implement within your organization. As we said, the DCOS is a framework that allows progressive improvement. So what we are doing within DCOS is that it's not a pass-fail, as we said for ISO, but it has maturity-based process descriptions. So in that sense, and the process maturity is measured based on the traditional ISO standards for process maturity benchmarking. So it starts with DCOS 1. Now, DCOS 1 is obviously a level where you really don't want to be, because that is a level where we sometimes call it, it's run by luck. There's basically no or very little documentation, monitoring is not really done, people are not really well trained, processes are not really well defined, and typically nothing is documented. So because of that, a lot of it is in people's head, which is of course very risky in an organization. Level 2 is slightly better. But we still have a very high reliance on people, in terms of their knowledge and their skills. So if they unfortunately leave suddenly, then we might have a big problem. Level 3 is really the minimum where we would like to be, where things are standardized and at least everything is nicely described. Level 4 would be something that we should aim for, because it helps us to do continuous improvement. And level 5 is obviously what your boss would like to see, This is the ultimate goal where all the processes are under full management control and all the processes are well integrated. So that means your data center is running like a well-oiled machine, so to speak. Now, to break it down in a few, measure points, and by all means, this is not complete, but it gives you a little bit of an overview of some of the things that we would be looking at, from a high-level perspective when qualifying the data center in a particular maturity level. So, for example, if you look at, say, level 1, as we said, we call it very often run by luck, very person dependent. Almost nothing or very little has been implemented. So it doesn't mean the data center doesn't go down. It doesn't mean it doesn't run okay. But if one person leaves or multiple pieces leave, you might be at a huge risk. Level 3, that's where we at the minimum would like to be, where everything is reasonably well described. At least things are under management control from a process point of view. With level 5, which is really where you want to be when you are aiming for operational excellence. As you can see, everything is well under control. So ask yourself a question: how mature is your data center? Do you have any processes, and hopefully not mission critical processes, that are very dependent on one or multiple persons? The staff that you have, are they appropriately trained, or is it happening that they are too busy to be trained? Do you have a competency growth plan for your staff? Do you have a service catalog, right? And a service catalog should be well defined and based on a needs analysis. And the question is then, of course, when was the last time that you did a need analysis? And need analysis could be based on market information, could be based on actual customers that you have already served. And again, it could be internal and external customers. Are your processes fully integrated? I'm sure that many of you have maybe some processes integrated, but are all your processes integrated? And of course, the big thing is, do you monitor and control service levels and all the processes? Because if you don't monitor and you don't control service levels, then of course you could be at major risk. And sometimes it's down to simple metrics. Do you have, for example, the maintenance skills metrics in place? So of all the equipment that you have in your data center, have you well defined in terms of what type of maintenance can be provided, what skills are in-house, which skills are external, which one has to be outsourced, what is on a standard maintenance contract, etc. Do you have a proper matrix in place for your resource planning? Now, it sounds funny, and I'm sure that you will say that, yes, of course, we have that, we have a resource matrix, etc. Now, let me ask you then a simple question. If you go for lunch, is there still somebody who is a dedicated fire warden and a safety manager? Sometimes we see that people say, yes, we have a fire warden that is, Mr. or Mrs. X, and then suddenly the whole group goes for lunch, and suddenly normal fire warden is in the building. These are, simple examples that sneak in over time because, it's fun to have lunch together, but sometimes these things could be very, very dangerous. When something unfortunate might happen during, for example, out of office hours or during lunch times, etc. And that is something that needs to be broken down into, who is doing what, so to speak. Careful planning with proper names of the persons that are fulfilling particular functions. And again, you will be surprised how often we find that there is some level of planning on the whiteboard where people draw names of who is the on-duty manager and etc., etc. But sometimes simple things like coffee breaks or lunch breaks are basically not planned at all. So therefore, it would be good to look at DCOS as a fit for your data center, because DCOS is fully aligned with ISO. So if you have already ISO in place, and I'm sure that ISO 9000 is one of the key things that you have in place already, DCOS will add value because it is specifically written for data centers and it doesn't conflict with ISO. Some data centers who are just starting don't have any ISO process in place yet, or at least maybe not certified. DCOS could be a starting point, and then later you could add ISO, or the other way around. It's really up to you how you would like to do it. But by implementing the DCOS level, you now have an ability to really aim for data center excellence and have this maturity level of operations in place. Good news about DCOS is not so mysterious as ISO. It's very well defined. It's very, very practical. That was one of the objectives that we have when we developed this quality framework, to say we don't want it to be another ISO type. We want it to be very specific. Now, very specific sometimes makes people worried, that they say, well, if it's very specific, what about flexibility? Well, there is a lot of flexibility in the standard, because we understand that different organizations do things differently. So there might be a statement in the standard that says that if you need to enter the data center, you must show, for example, a valid government issued photo ID. Now, maybe your organization says we do that for the first registration, but after that we rely on biometrics or fingerprints, etc. Well, again, that is not an issue at all, because there is a proper management control over who gets access, and that is based on real identities. So although you could consider it relatively prescriptive, yeah, this is great for people, of course, that have not always an idea what needs to be done, but it allows for great flexibility for those people who know how to run data centers and want to implement certain processes in a different way. The DCOS also contains a large number of checklists, which you can use as guidance for the maintenance on your equipment. And it's typically split down into the daily, monthly, quarterly, and annual checks or maintenance that you need to perform. Now, of course, this is a recommendation, but of course, if you have a vendor that has, for example, equipment that they believe have different rankings in terms of what needs to be done when, then that is the minimum, of course, that you need to abide by. As I said, DCOS is adaptable to your data center business requirement. It allows progressive improvement over time. So how does that really work? Well, the first thing is that you need to decide which disciplines you think are important for your data center. Again, recall those 11 disciplines. So, of course, service level management is the first thing you need to look at, because if you don't know what level of service you need to provide and what services you need to provide to your customers, then the rest you simply cannot plan, right? So, but you might say, I take service level management, operations and facility maintenance, monitoring and control. That is the minimum that I would like to have under management control. And the rest of the 11 disciplines, I'll take that for later. The other thing that you can do, so apart from choosing your scope in terms of which disciplines, you can also set a target maturity level for each and every discipline. So you could say, I want the discipline of service level management to be at, say, maturity level number 4 and operations at level 3. Yeah, you can mix and match depending on your business requirements. What we do see, though, that most people that are adopting the DCOS is that they set an overall target, and most people start with 3, and then they benchmark themselves at the 3 level, and then from there they do progressive improvement. So what you normally see is happening that over time they start adding more disciplines, and in some cases they also start working towards higher levels of maturity. And again, that could be an overall maturity, but it could also be a maturity for certain disciplines that they have chosen based on their business requirement. So again, this flexibility allows you to start small, especially if you have limited resources, or you don't have a big issue in certain areas, so to speak. You might say, we'll save that for later. So DCOS clearly gives results. Yeah, we've seen it over and over again. It gives you a proper all-encompassing data center operations management framework specifically for data centers. It gives very well-defined and measurable results. We make sure by doing the right implementation of the process that the data center services are aligned with the business objectives. Not to forget compliance, of course, because that is very important as well. And by doing that properly, you can avoid heavy penalties. And in some countries, they can be really, really heavy. And overall, it eliminates, or at the minimum, it reduces the risk of downtime or the impact that is caused by human error. But how do we get the most out of these risks? It's always like, where do we start? How do we begin to adopt a framework that can help us to minimize risk? Well, what we would like to suggest is just read through the DCOS so that you have a bit of an idea of how it all hangs together, so to speak, that you can understand what are the mechanics in it, what are some of the descriptions, etc., etc. Now, we have good news for you. For those of you who attend this webinar, we will generate a free DCOS document for you, which you will receive in the next couple of days. So that is good news. You made it all the way till this point. Then, when you have read through the document, you start writing down which disciplines, domains you think are really important for you, and are the first ones that you believe you would like to tackle. You do a gap analysis. Some organizations do that internally, although we, personally don't believe that that is always effective, because we know that if we are judging ourselves, we always give ourselves a little bit more slack than if somebody else does it, right? So very often we might give ourselves a higher ranking than somebody who looks at it from a fresh level, so to speak. So ideally, you get a third party to have a look at it. Then, of course, when you have gaps, if at all, then you can have a look at a realistic action plan to either close the gap or maybe bring yourself at a higher level of maturity. And don't forget to celebrate success. Yeah, I think that's very important for motivation within a data center environment, that when you have achieved a certain measure point, that you celebrate it. And of course, from there, you can either expand the scope if you think that's relevant to your organization, or improve the maturity, or in some cases, you might say, we just keep the scope and the maturity level at that level, and we just want to maintain it over time because that meets the business criteria. Now, for those of you who think that you would like to go for something external, we recommend this benchmarking and auditing done by external people, because ultimately, if you do an independent audit, you will see much better the effectiveness that your operations have and your overall risk position. Okay, so I think that really helps you by getting a really adequate and not a rosy look on your organization and operations. You will get a better understanding of your risk exposure and how you can, put the continuous improvement plan together. And again, I think overall, similar as with ISO, etc., an external audit and certification always helps with credibility, whether that is for yourself or for your organization. So how does the auditing goes in process? Well, typically this is following the ISO standard for audit and certification. So normally we have what we call a stage 1. This is what we call a desktop audit. So that means that typically remotely, the documents will be reviewed that you have, all the process documents. So this will then determine if there are any processes missing, and of those documents that you have in place, whether there are adequate details for your business risk. Then when that is all done, then we go to what we call the stage 2, which is an on-site audit. And there we're going to look at, say, the actual process execution. Remember that I said that in quite a few organizations, we find evidence that whatever is described in the documents is actually not executed. Sometimes it is purely because it was not really well conveyed. Sometimes people have new staff coming in. Yes, there is a process, but they're not really trained on it. We see those examples. We also see examples where the process is just so over-engineered that people on the floor just go crazy and say, well, forget about the whole thing, can't be bothered, which is a danger as well. And then, of course, as an organization, you need to start reviewing. Now, do we need to force the people to follow the process? Or do we adopt the process to the general daily working method of the people on the floor, so that we don't tax them, but we still have the appropriate levels of control in place to minimize risk? Of course, we review the documents. There will be some interviews with selected staff to understand a little bit better of what they're doing and how they're doing it, to see whether the level of execution is meeting what is in the process document. And of course, for both stage 1 and stage 2, there will be a report coming that indicates where the potential gaps are, what the maturity levels are for each of those processes and sub-processes. Now, the document, of course, can be quite lengthy, and we all know that we're short on time. So what we provide in the document as well is those nice little spider charts that you see here, and we provide 2 of them. So 2 meaning the first one is the overall maturity of the organization based on the scope chosen. Now here you see that there are 11 disciplines, but in your organization you could choose, for example, to go for 4 disciplines only. The blue one line is indicating the desired or your target maturity level that you have set as an organization. And the red line is indicating what you have achieved. So now from a management perspective, you can very quickly identify the areas that you believe should be brushed up as set priorities. So you might say, what, organization resilience is at level 2. It's not where we want to be, but okay, we accept it for the moment, but we can clearly see that, say, governance and risk compliance is way out of line. So we need to boost that up, as quickly as we can, because if we have a compliance issue, we might be liable to involve with penalties, etc. Again, remember, there are sub-disciplines. So what you will get in the report is also for each and every main discipline, you will get a breakout chart like this, a spider chart that identifies all the sub-disciplines and the maturity level of those. So you can very quickly, again, identify and say, what is it that we need to fix, allocate resources for it, and benchmark it over time. So again, these charts we've seen, helps the organization very, very quickly to identify where the risks are and, determine the resource requirements to address those risks that they believe are the most important to them. And if everything is done nicely, there will be a beautiful cert on the wall, and you will get a indicia as well that can be used for most organizations. Use this in their email and in their marketing communication as a quality stamp to show customers that they have done a great job. So in summary, human error is everywhere. It's a very big contributor to the downtime of data centers, and it's something that we really need to work on. Effective operations is key to any data center, and we need to make sure that this is under control so we have high availability and operational efficiency. DCOS is the only standard in the world that is addressing all the disciplines that we need to have in place in the data center environment from a governance, operations, and maintenance perspective. It is specifically written, so it's not generic, but it is aligned to ISO. So that is, of course, very important. And this is, I think, a very key one that a lot of customers like, that it allows for progressive improvement. We're all too busy already. So this will ease on the organization to slowly grow to this operational excellence target. It's certifiable, and there's global recognition. And ultimately, DCOS will create trust in the customers that you are serving by making sure that they understand that you have done, ultimately the best you could do to minimize risk and safeguard their interest. With that, we have come to the end, and we're going through the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Edward, for this presentation. Where I've gathered some questions in the chat already. First of all, the presentation will be shared afterwards. Murtaza has a question that is, what are the areas where human error may cause downtime?
Yeah, it's at various levels. We see one of the big contributors is often when changes are made. So, obviously in data centers, we are undergoing changes at a regular basis, right? Whether it's installing more capacity or doing maintenance, etc. That is where we see that, improper planning, not having the right check processes in place, that is typically a very critical environment. So maintenance is a big issue, and, expansion in terms of capacity, new equipment being rolled in, old equipment being taken out, etc. Those are some of the key areas.
Okay, thank you. Another question that was from Richard. Do we have a DCOS certification like ISO? I think you already answered that question, right?
Yeah, we do have. So there is indeed a certification scheme for the DCOS. So it is following the ISO standard, actually. So what you'll see with the DCOS certification, for those that are familiar with ISO certification, you will have the first part where you have the certification. And then obviously we need to ensure that the processes are kept up to date and well implemented. So you'll have the regular surveillance and recertification audit, similar as the ISO cycle. It's a 3-year cycle.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Manoy asks, can we get the format for gap analysis and other audit?
Now, there is no real form. Basically because obviously there are different ways of how data centers are doing certain processes. But what normally would happen is that we take the DCOS document, and from there we start, looking at the sub-disciplines and see how you have implemented that one. So there is not a, standard tick in the box type of scenario, because it varies per organization in terms of the maturity they choose and the way they've implemented things. So if you want to have a look at, say, a gap analysis type of scenario, then basically the key is to take the DCOS document and lay it next to your process documents and see how you execute it. But as we said before, be very careful, because we tend to be a bit too gentle on ourselves when we judge ourselves. So that could be a bit of a risk factor.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Manoy is the DCOS worldwide recognized?
Yes, it is. We have certification in various parts of the world. So whether it's Latin America, Europe is starting, Middle East we have done projects, Asia we've done projects. So yeah, it's something that we've seen in a variety of countries, different type of environments, as I said, whether it is mission critical, like in banking industry, we've done certifications, but also in commercial data centers.
Okay. Thank you. And Adele has a similar question. Are there? Can you share some statistics about DCOS adoption?
Well, I don't have statistics in my head in in terms of how many we have certified, but you can go actually to the epi-certification.com website. There is a listing of the data centers that are certified for DCOS. But be aware, there are quite a few projects going on, and not every customer want to be listed, especially those customers who have achieved only level 2. They tend to say that we don't want to be listed yet till we have achieved our target of level 3, and then they typically give us approval for listing. So the listing that you see there are the customers that have done the certification to the target level that they actually wanted to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Damawan. Will it be possible to have the format for the audit checklist for self-assessment purposes?
Yeah, that's a bit what we addressed before. There's no Excel spreadsheet, so to speak, where you can say click yes or click no, because it's very data center dependent, as we said. And that is, I guess, a bit where an independent assessment comes in handy, because it is for some people quite difficult to look through the list and then start filtering out the criteria that they need to implement. So yeah, if people have an interest in understanding where they really are in terms of maturity, etc., then yeah, an external assessment could always work. But if you want to do it internally, then yeah, take the DCOS document, lay it next to the process document that you have, and see how well you have implemented it. Now, of course, judging whether you are at level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, that will require some extra skills. EPI will be rolling out courses specifically for making those judgments. At the moment, if you want to have more insight in DCOS, then you can follow some of the existing courses we have, the CDFOS, the Certified Data Center Facility Operations Specialist, or the CDFOM, the Certified Data Center Facilities Operations Manager. Those courses are closely aligned with the DCOS. So if you just want to understand more about, how do I implement those statements in my data center, then those courses might help you to at least, understand what you could or should be doing.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Anand. How can we get this DCOS certification for our customers?
By contacting API. So if you have, and I assume that Anand is like a reseller or an system integrator or a data center consulting firm. If your customers have an interest, then ping us at support@epi-ap.com, and then we can work with you to understand what is the scope, the number of disciplines the customer would like to achieve, how big the organization or how small the organization is, and from there then we can establish the work effort required and go from there.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, when will EPI send a free copy of the DCOS? Well, that will be afterwards, right?
Yeah, that will be afterwards. We will generate a free copy. So normally DCOS is an item that you can purchase on our website or read it for free if you will go through the browser. But we'll get the whole list, and we will make sure that within the next couple of days they will be generated, and then we'll flip it over to you. Okay,
I think we have some time for another question. Murtaza asks, what is the difference between QMS and DCOS?
It's actually, it's almost the same in a sense. QMS is a very broad term that people use to call it a quality management system. So, for example, ISO 9000 is a quality management system. So DCOS, from that level, you can consider it to be a quality management system, or we call it a framework as well. Basically, the aim of a QMS, similar as with DCOS, to get process under management control, and in our case, also fully integrated. And that is one of those things that you will see missing in ISO. There is no fluent integration between one to another. So you're certified for, say, 20,000 and for 9,000 and 27,000, and there's not always a very strong integration between those areas. Thereby in DCOS, there's a very clear link between the various processes and how they should be integrated.
Okay, good. There's another question from India, from Anand. Do you provide audit services in India? I think they can find a list on the website, right, from EPI certification.
Yeah, you can actually, and you can contact our office there. We have an office in India, so you can contact them directly, and they can help you on the way. Yeah.
Another question. Can you share a bit on the EPI organization? How do you guarantee your business continuity?
Business continuity of EPI, or business continuity of the organization?
I think of EPI.
Of EPI, okay, but if I get hit with a beer truck, there are measures in place to make sure that the organization stays alive. So within EPI, obviously we have plans for business continuity, right? And we do that at different levels. So within EPI, we have multiple layers of decision making. Data we have replicated in various locations, offline and online storage. So in that sense, we are well positioned for business continuity. So we are already in the business for 36 years. So we definitely want to stay for another 36 years and more and beyond.
Yes, thank you. Can you say something about the average ranking achieved so far in DCOS certifications from
most of the data centers that we have done, people start very brave and say, oh, we're definitely level 4 or maybe even level 5. But the reality is that most data centers are around level 3. Some inching towards level 4, some have achieved 4. We have also a few data centers, less than a handful, that have actually achieved level 5. There's only, I think, 3 of them, if I'm not wrong, 2 or 3. So most are around in between 3 to 4. That is where the bulk are. We have a few that are really at level 2, in between 2 to 3. But they are typically, they don't want to list themselves, at least not on our website yet, till they have achieved. Most people said the minimum at level 3.
Okay, thank you. A question from God's Will is, how is DCOS different from NC, TIA, and uptime?
Okay, DCOS is aimed at operations. TIA is a availability standard, which is aimed at facility. So it really describes, how do you do, for example, power layouts and equipment, say mechanical cooling systems, fire suppression, etc. So it's really aimed at resilience built at the facility level, so to speak. So DCOS is that layer above that is basically addressing the operational layer.
Okay, thank you. Somebody asks, Manoy asks, what will be the process if I want to be a DCOS auditor? Okay,
there is actually a scheme that we're working on that will be released to allow also other organizations to conduct DCOS audits. It's in the work at the moment. We have to go through a few rounds because obviously we need to make sure that it's well aligned with ISO, etc. But in general, it will be aimed at certification bodies that are following the ISO 17021, and there will be various levels of training provided for, say, DCOS consultants, as well as DCOS audit levels.
Thank you. Sanjeev asks, can AI implementation in these data center operations reduce operations team?
Yeah, definitely. Over time it can. So it will not wipe out all the people, of course. So don't expect a building with nothing inside. There will always be people working around the floor. But yes, there are various levels of AI implementation that can help, to basically elevate, the stress on the operational team. Depending on how you want to go, I know, for example, a data center in China has done automation where literally a robot is scanning every rack, and the robot can actually even take out a network cable out of a port and plug it into another port. So it is possible to go to that level operations, but a lot of data centers have not come to that level yet. So will it be there? Yes, it will come. It will come in stages for sure. But don't expect anything to come, in the next 1 or 2 years. It will definitely take a couple of more years for that to really iron out and become really mature technology at an affordable level as well.
Okay, we have a couple of questions left. I'm currently working as a data center engineer, asks Eric Musaka. Do we have any certified organizations for me to get certified as a data center engineer?
The first start is, of course, to go through the courses. My colleague Jan has given some links in the chat window. So the key thing for me is always to get certification, because that at least gives you a leg up compared to other people that might apply to a job. Let's face it, as an organization, we normally look at the capability, history of the people, their work experience, and official certification definitely adds an extra bonus point to that. So my take on it is always like, get some formal education in the areas that you would like to be, whether it's operations, whether it's on risk management, whether it's on design and build, etc. And then from there, move forward into getting a role. That will be the way to go.
Okay, thank you. Maybe a little bit off topic, but can EPI help in audits for TIA standards?
Yes, we can. EPI is the by far largest data center auditor and certification body for the TIA 942. We've done, even last year, we've done well over 200 data centers where we performed the audit. So yeah, reach out to us, support@epi-ap.com, and then we can link you up to the relevant people that can help you for audits for standard for TA.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Murtaza. In AWS or other well organization, I have seen TIA requirements. I haven't seen DCOS requirements. Why is it so?
Yeah, that is, I think, a bit of a historic reason. I think if you look at, say, overall, when we look at, say, data centers, the first thing that people always address is the product, i.e. the data center itself. So that is where normally the highest demand is for certification, because people want to make sure the basics is covered so that the data center is well designed and resilient, etc. Then we normally see the next layer coming in. This is ISO certification, because ISO has been around, of course, for many, many years. So the default ISO 9000 is a given, but we see more and more requirements coming up for DCOS. So don't forget that DCOS is relatively new. It's been released. Well, we had a version in 2016, but the main version that came out is 2021, so it's relatively new. So in that sense, there are more organizations now that become aware of it, because it's an education to the market as well, where people understand. Again, if you go to data centers where they have not heard of DCOS, sometimes they get a bit of a smile on their face to say, oh, finally there is something that we can use as a reference point, because we always thought that ISO was the only reference that we could do. So I think the biggest hurdle and why it is not so widespread yet is the basically the marketing around it, so to speak, to make people aware of the DCOS. And that's obviously the aim with this webinar as well, to give people more exposure to understand what the value is that DCOS can bring to your organization.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of good questions here. I have some other questions. Can we go some over time?
Yeah, sure. I have no issue.
Okay. I have a question from Kio. What scope of business or size or of organization require DCOS?
Well, basically, the easy answer would be everybody needs DCOS. Because everybody is potentially at risk for downtime, right, due to the human factor. So whether you're a big organization or a small organization, theoretically, everybody could benefit, from DCOS. So I wouldn't say that it's only for big organizations or mission critical organizations. Even small organizations that need to run at an efficient and effective level, don't want to have compliance risks, etc., etc. DCOS will be, an excellent framework to implement.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Francis. How easy to maintain the 11 disciplines you talked about?
Okay, well, if if you say maintain, so that kind of like assumes that it has been implemented already, then it is just part of the usual, measurements every year, right? To make sure is the service level still up to what the customers require, and then it trickled down in the other processes. So as with any implementation of any quality management framework, the first step is always the bigger one, right? Because there might be gaps here and there. But what we see is that once it has been implemented, then of course there could be still risk areas when people change positions or new services are released, etc. But it's typically easier to maintain rather than do the first implementation, depending on the level of maturity the organization has achieved already.
Okay, thank you. I see here a question which I think it is answered yet. But maybe good to point out that the question is, do you have any checklists to follow in order to achieve DCOS certification? Well, in the standard there are checklists, and on the website of EPI you can find checklists as well.
No.
So we shared a link to that in the chat. I think this is the last question. What are the major challenges in data center operations and maintenance? That's a question of Sanjeev.
Yeah, well, I think there are many issues. Sometimes it could be budget issues. Literally, the company is trying to, pinch on money and, do the minimum of the minimum in terms of maintenance. I think a general issue that we see overall in the industry is that, there are just not enough hands on the floor. It's sometimes, very frustrating to see organizations where they spend a lot of money on the data center, and literally 200 million is being poured into the building, but then they're running really at the skin of, just only a few people that need to maintain everything. So I think the biggest challenge in data centers is still the skill level. I think for some of you who have seen some of my presentations, there is an outflow of skills and competences in the industry. People with gray hair start retiring. The people that come out of the educational industry or institutions don't always have the experience yet, of course, to literally flow in those levels. So I think the key at the moment is skill shortage and all that.
Okay. Oh, there still are questions coming in. What are the criteria to enroll for DCOS?
Well, DCOS is not a criteria in the sense that you need to pass, right? Basically, for DCOS, you need to have a data center, right, or provide data center services, and then from there you could, basically, put this framework up in your organization. So, as I said, it is for people that own and operate a data center. But we have also certified organizations that provide outsourced facility maintenance and data center operations. So it's not only for data center owners, it could also be organizations that are maintaining data centers on behalf of the owner. And I'm sure you have known those outsourced organizations.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Adele. Can you share some statistics about cost of deploying DCOS depending on the rate?
Yeah, that is a bit hard to indicate, right? Because it depends on, first of all, how many disciplines, what maturity you are pursuing. Then, of course, it depends on the country of operation, because in some countries, of course, auditing is more expensive than in other areas. So in that sense, it's a wide range. So without, because we don't want to just throw a couple of numbers in the air because either people freak out or people start laughing. Yeah, it really depends on the data center. So if you have an interest in potentially deploying DCOS, then we can always give you, a free quote to give you an idea of what, based on your disciplines and target level and your country, what the cost would roughly be. If you want to just have a bit of an indication, again, free from any obligation, of course, then just reach out to us and then we can help you with that.
Okay. Thank you. Another question is, why not one standard certification for data centers like PMP, PMI? Data center have many certifications. Why not able to make one?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it has been discussed many times. And the reason why there is no one certification, well, there are two parts to it. One is the competing standards organizations, that is one. But the other part is that there are so many aspects, in the data center, people, processes. As you can see, even in the DCOS, we have already 11 processes. The different type of architectures in the data center. So normally what we see is that people split it into facility type of certification and operation certification. Now, technically speaking, right, you could put everything in one big encyclopedia and give it to people and say, okay, here you go and do everything. But that is obviously not, the easiest way to implement it, because some people say, I don't care about operation, I just want to do facility certification. Some people say facility is fine. I know that I have already complied, or I know I can never comply, but my biggest issue is operation. So I just want to do operation certification.
Okay, thank you, Edward. I think we are there. We have had a lot of good questions.
Sure.
Thank you for your answers. And I think we are on the point that we are closing up the webinar now.
Excellent.
So
I hope that it was useful for everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got some insight in how potentially DCOS could assist your organization to get a proper quality management framework in place. Again, feel free to reach out to us. If you have any questions, if you just want to get some free idea in terms of how we could help you, and costing, if that is of interest, etc., feel free to reach out, and then we can hopefully help you further to improve the risk management profile of your data center, to reduce risk and to help you to run more effective and efficient.
okay, with that said, we are closing up. Thank you very much. Thank you to all. Thank you for being here, and have a good day.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.